We are now ready to go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this April 3rd, 2020 emergency meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board. Call this meeting to order. I note to all listening that a quorum is 7 members, which was confirmed prior to the start of this meeting. I now seek a motion to approve the agenda for this April 30th, 2020 meeting. Is there an motion?
I'll make the motion. Donna Tipton Rogers.
Motion by President Tipton Rogers. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Ford.
Second by Mr. Ford. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Camnett,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan, Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
thank you. Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers, Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
And motion carries. We have an agenda. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. I'll now turn to Superintendent Johnson for your update.
Thank you, and I wanted to briefly update everyone on where we are heading now in this COVID-19 crisis. As everyone knows, this crisis forced us to be very reactive. Everything happened very quickly starting in March, and honestly, decisions that we were making with DPI leadership and local superintendents across the state and the governor, decisions were happening hour by hour, even minute by minute. Everything was very reactive. And as we worked through the issues that came with COVID-19, decisions started moving from hour by hour to day by day. And now we're making decisions week by week and even looking into the fall. So it is a real turning point in this COVID-19 crisis where we finally have the ability to start being proactive instead of reactive. And this COVID-19 crisis, as we all know, has created some pretty unprecedented challenges. And those challenges are causing a lot of frustration for teachers, students, parents, and we could not be more proud or appreciative of the educators and school staff who have really stepped up in this crisis to make sure that we take care of the whole child and make sure students are fed and nourished physically and mentally, and also work as strong as we possibly can to keep learning going. I mean, we know we switched to remote learning from 0% to 100% overnight, and that has brought a lot of frustration for parents, students, and teachers. But again, so appreciative of educators and parents for their resilience during this time. Importantly, we are getting the message out to parents and teachers that what we're going through right now is not the new normal. We recognize that this situation is not sustainable. So we today are launching a task force that will focus on how we reopen schools in the fall. This task force, I am very proud that it will be bipartisan, from public school students all the way up to the governor's office and many stakeholders in between, with representation from the state board, representation from the NC Senate, the NC House, and superintendents from across the state and representing small counties that are having a very difficult time with remote learning online, all the way to larger counties where they're facing their own challenges. And we are excited to focus on how we improve opportunity going forward. So we know that remote learning has to be more user-friendly and more practical. Also, we are going to look at how we address the very large learning gap that we know is going to face our students when they return in the fall, and how do we meet students where they are, specifically looking at something that under the leadership of Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest, this board has been very focused on, competency-based learning, and obviously one of our priorities is personalized learning. How do we meet students at their ability level when they return and help them on their own pace reach a point where they close those learning gaps? And, of course, social distancing. We're working very closely with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services with the goals of getting as many teachers and students back into schools as safely as possible, and determining how we can go forward with extracurricular activities. Social distancing is likely going to be unavoidable until we have a vaccine, and everyone can understand how difficult it will be to socially distance on a school bus or in a classroom or in a hallway or a cafeteria. But we all can agree, having gone through this current situation, that nothing is a replacement for a student being in a classroom. I can speak for myself, for my own 7-year-old first grader. Not only the difficulties we're having with remote learning, even though everyone is trying their hardest and their best, not only the fact that she is not getting the same enrichment she would get if she were at school, but also the emotional toll that especially our young students are going through. The fact that in this normal we have right now, which will not be the new normal, the birthday party we had for the student in our neighborhood was drive by and honk the horn. That is playing a significant emotional toll on especially our younger students, and my family is living through that right now as well. It's going to be important that we work our hardest to find solutions to get as many students back into school buildings as possible. So we're very excited about this, and we're very excited that we can switch from being reactive to being proactive and come up with these solutions before next school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. I note for the record, the board will take a roll call vote on all items requiring action on this agenda. We'll now proceed directly to our committee work and begin with the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine?
Standards and Practices Committee of the State Board, and joining me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White. Chair Davis, if I could take just no more than about a moment of personal privilege to tack on to the comments made by Superintendent Johnson, and the section of the anthem that is associated with the Order of the Longleaf Pine, that last section. I have thought about that section so many times the last few weeks, and it states where the weak grow strong and the strong grow great. Here's to down home, the old North State. And I am so proud to be a North Carolinian, and especially a North Carolinian who is an educator, because our educators have proven the last few words of this anthem. We have reformed education in ways that we could have never imagined. We couldn't, I mean, if we'd gotten together and brainstormed for ages, what we are experiencing today would not have been the outcome of our dreaming and our brainstorming. So I think that anthem is just so pertinent to the state of North Carolina now than ever before, to my knowledge. And so with that said, I'll continue with my one item for the day. We are going to, board members, we're going to revisit an item that we voted on March 27th and it pertains to the section in the benefits manual, section 9.4.2. It pertains to the contagious disease policy to address COVID-19 pandemic. And Eric Snyder is going to come forward and to walk us through the one change only. This is not a major change in this policy. It is a change that needs to reflect where we are in COVID-19. So I would ask him to come forward and take a few minutes and walk us through that section of the benefits manual.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. And just a quick mic check. Deanna, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you're good.
Great. Thank you. So board members, as Dr. Oxendine mentioned, this is a policy that you will recall from last month's emergency meeting at the end of March. You will recall that the board added this provision to its benefits manual to extend paid leave benefits to public school employees and LEAs, the ISD, and the regional school. And the purpose of the extended leave policy was to protect public health and safeguard the well-being of public school employees. So during recent weeks, the board office and the department have been in contact with local school leaders, governor's office, as well as Office of State Human Resources to discuss continued emergency leave benefits. And the proposal before you today would extend those benefits through May 31st of this year. The policy functions the same way it was when it was brought before you last month, and school districts would continue to administer the benefit as they did here in April. So why extend the benefit with this proposal? First, those original goals remain relevant, furthering those public health objectives and protecting employee well-being. There are additionally some federal concerns. As you know, board members, under the Federal CARES Act, those public schools who are set to receive a cut of that nearly $400 million sent to the state from the federal government are required to the greatest extent practicable to continue to pay employees and contractors during the period of disruptions and school closures related to the coronavirus. And this policy would help districts continue to meet that mandate, federal law, and protect those funds. With respect to timing through the end of May, districts have asked the department and communicated with the board office that they would like some level of certainty with respect to the benefits to avoid churn within their HR departments and uncertainty and questioning from their staffs. They've counseled for a longer period. Some have asked for a longer period, some have asked for a shorter period, but we continue to monitor DHHS and CDC guidance concerning public health and have arrived at a proposal of May 31st. Naturally, as you'd expect, we'll revisit as necessary in the coming weeks. So briefly, just a quick thanks to Alexis Schaus and Tom Tomberlin, as well as the members of the Legislative and Policy Work Group from the agency and from the field who've provided assistance in helping develop this proposal today. So with that, members, I'll stop and see if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. And to my colleagues, does anyone have a question?
Madam Chair, this is Mr. Ford. May I ask a question, please?
Absolutely, Mr. Ford.
Appreciate that, Mr. Snyder. I have a question, not about the portion of proposed changes, but if we could scroll back up to, I think, the third paragraph of the text of the guidance and document. So the section where it says, during the COVID-19 event, the SBE encourages all public schools to provide remote work opportunities for their employees that will limit the spread of COVID-19 infection. I just have a concern. I've received some correspondence from stakeholders that in their districts, that this language is perhaps too loose. It serves as guidance, but what ends up happening is, the first alternative is to find ways for folks to still come in, and unless absolutely necessary, folks are encouraged to work from home. And inevitably, it ends up breaking out across sort of class lines too, so that, in many cases, teachers are allowed to work from home, but folks who are certified staff, who are often, if we're being honest, right, less well paid, are sort of deliberately being put in harm's way, and being forced to kind of come into these environments where, it places them at unnecessary risk. So is there a way that we can strengthen the language around that so that it's clear that our absolute first priority as a board is that you exhaust all alternatives for folks to work remotely, and until it's proven that's not practical, that they be forced to come in? Is there anything we can do with the language around that or provide some additional clarification?
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And Mr. Snyder, would you comment on that, please?
Certainly, I think thank you, Mr. Ford, for those comments. Certainly, there were a number of questions that came into the department as COVID really hit our districts in March and into the beginning of April, where this question came up frequently. I think the board can take a look at any sort of friendly amendment with respect to that provision, whether it's encourages to the maximum extent possible all public schools to provide remote work opportunities. Certainly, board's prerogative with respect to any kind of language you may want to add.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. I absolutely agree with Mr. Ford in the spirit of his concern and the question that he has raised before us. My one concern would be doing anything within the policy with regard to changing the wording at this stage of the game. My thinking is that school systems have probably, superintendents, local board members, HR directors have probably given a lot of thought to crafting any of their local policies and procedures around our specific language, SBE specific language. So to go in and to make adjustments, even though to us it would seem simple, the ramifications of those changes would probably be taxing and tedious. What I would recommend, Mr. Snyder, if we could do this, any information such as cover letters, discussions with HR directors, is that we embed additional language, not changing the policy language, but adding oomph and emphasis around the word encourage, remote work opportunities. If that could be a middle ground for us, I think that would be a good one. Any thoughts? Board members or Mr. Snyder?
Dr. Oxendine, this is Matt Bristow-Smith. May I?
Sure, please.
Thank you. Dr. Oxendine, as you know, I'm a principal in Edgecombe County, and our district leadership here has been fantastic in trying to embrace both the letter and the spirit of this policy from the state. Our superintendent, Dr. Bridges, has established a tone and a culture in our county that has done everything possible to try to accommodate remote learning opportunities and remote work opportunities for both students and employees. So appreciative of the fact that she's embraced that word encourage within this district, and knowing that it's a learning process for all of us. There has been a significant amount of discussion, and this is to Mr. Ford's point, about the nature of creating alternative duties for staff members that may not be able to complete their typical work assignments in a remote setting, but might be able to assign, with additional flexibility, alternative duties that would allow their positions to become either half or even full-time remote opportunities if their job descriptions were flexible, if districts had that prerogative to, in a remote learning environment or remote work environment, add alternative duties that would allow us to shift some positions that might be otherwise considered mandatory to remote. So just to the idea that Mr. Ford was advocating, that we might be able to strengthen this language if we increase the flexibility of districts to provide alternative duties, that might be one piece. And then a second piece that has to do with the risk that some of our mandatory employees might be facing. And it has to do with the availability of personal protective equipment to employees that are working on the ground with the public, delivering food, working with each other in situations where social distancing may or may not be possible. And I didn't know if there might have been, with the goal of protecting employees, the expectation that districts provide PPEs for their employees, if there is language that might be necessary to try to protect those employees. So without going too far down this road, I wanted to interject those two considerations. The first about flexibility for work assignments, and then the second about how personal protective equipment factors in for mandatory employees who must report to work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. With respect to flexibility of job assignments, that's a very good point to raise, and makes plenty sense that superintendents would give consideration to that. I would imagine, and Mr. Snyder, please, or Dr. Tomberlin, if you would chime in, I would imagine that flexibility option is certainly available within the framework of the policy that we've established. With regard to 9.4.2 or some other area of the policy manual.
Dr. Oxendine, Eric Snyder here. Certainly, as employers, our school districts can take a look at those job descriptions and accommodate their priorities and during this time as they work with their employees as has been outlined here.
And also with respect to dangerous equipment, those kind of issues that would fall under OSHA, I suppose, I would expect to already be in policy, HR policy, personnel codes, so on and so forth, in order to be compliant with federal and state regulations.
Sure, in that respect, our LEAs are not unlike our colleagues in private industry with respect to managing their workplaces appropriately and taking those precautions. And with a large state, there's certainly expertise at DHHS and OSHA and labor to help define those kinds of safe workplaces.
Thank you very much. This has been a really good discussion. I would like for us, Mr. Snyder, to emphasize the necessity of finding remote work opportunities for employees, to strengthen without changing the word in the policy encourage, but to emphasize it and to draw attention to the additional issues that have been raised in this discussion. So with that said, do I hear other comments or questions from my colleagues before I conclude this item? With that said, Chair Davis, this item is coming before us later this morning for approval by this extension in the policy for approval by the board. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. I would want to share with colleagues that there's been some additions to our materials for this meeting, and suggest that you refresh your connection in order to get those updated materials. Mr. Duncan, are you still on the line?
I've gotten back on, I hope. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure can.
Very good.
So I'll now recognize you to begin the Business Operations Committee meeting.
Thank you very much. Along with Todd Chasteen, sorry, Todd, we lead the BizOp Committee, and we have 3 items for your consideration in this meeting today. The first one, BizOp 1, involves the COVID CARES Act. Specifically, the Education Stabilization Fund programs, elementary and secondary emergency relief fund. As you recall, we have talked about the CARES Act at previous meetings. It is an important lifeline for our schools, which will have extraordinary needs this summer and the next school year. Under this program, the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education makes grants to each state educational agency with an approved application. As materials note, North Carolina stands to receive more than $396 million in federal dollars. Under the CARES Act, the states must award at least 90% of that money to local education agencies to support their local responses to COVID-19. The legislation affords the LEA significant flexibility in using these funds, which we are sure they will need. The Act allows the state may reserve up to 0.5% for administrative costs. The remaining 9.5%, or whatever is unused of the administrative cost in addition, may be withheld to support, quote, emergency needs as determined by the state educational agency to address issues responding to coronavirus, which may be addressed through the uses of grants or contracts. We are grateful to the federal government for making this important investment in our schools. We also want to thank our state legislators and Governor Cooper, all of whom recognize that the influx of federal dollars will not be enough to meet our children's needs next school year, as the superintendent already reflected in his earlier remarks. We appreciate the care and attention that lawmakers have paid to requests for our K-12 public schools that the board shared in recent weeks. In light of the extraordinary needs we know of, as well as those emergency needs that we cannot yet foresee and will play themselves out to some degree by how the recovery proceeds, all of us on the board are cognizant of how important it is to exercise good stewardship over these limited resources. Before we turn to superintendent, we'll remind the board of some of its important constitutional and statutory duties concerning financial matters. Under Article 9, Section 5 of the North Carolina Constitution, it states that the State Board of Education shall supervise and admit public school system, and the educational funds provided for its support, except the funds mentioned in Section 7 of this article, and shall make all needed rules and regulations in relation thereto, subject to laws enacted by the General Assembly. Under NC General Statute 115C-12-5, under apportionment funds, the board shall have authority to apportion and equalize over the state all state school funds and all federal funds granted to the state for assistance to educational programs administered within or sponsored by the public school system of the state. Under NC General Statute 115C-408A, the board shall have general supervision and administration of the educational funds provided by the state and federal government. Under NC General Statute 115C-409, power to accept federal funds and aid, the board is authorized to accept, receive, use, or reallocate to local school administrative units any federal funds or aid that may be appropriated now or hereafter by the federal government for the encouragement and improvement of any phase of the free public school program, which, in the judgment of the board, will be beneficial to the operations of the schools. I had a brief opportunity to review the materials that the department provided last night. And I appreciate the thought and the recommendation that's outlined in the materials, and I'm sure all board members will feel that way also. I note, however, at the outset that this document, according to our counsel, requires additional revisions in order to reflect accurately, first of all, the board's statutory and constitutional role in receiving and allocating these federal funds. Second, the department's and superintendent's very important role in administering the board's decisions, making and ensuring compliance with those decisions about the allocation of those federal funds. The certification and agreement document that we received last night to be executed by the chief state school officer is not due until July 1. There are several items that we may want to discuss in terms of any amount in 9.5% or slightly more that may be held back in order to allocate where we go with use of those funds. That's particularly true since the legislature is presently in session. Both the department and the board has set out a number of very important legislative initiatives for the recovery of our schools from the coronavirus pandemic. And in that regard, greater clarity in terms of where we proceed with the legislature will become very important in terms of making any decisions. We have, as I said, a period of time before that certification agreement is due, and it's important that we make sure we're thoughtful in terms of all the things that we put down there and get a better sense or assessment with the ability of having some additional time on that. Obviously, the department's thoughts and recommendations will be important as we consider how to proceed. With those pieces of information in mind, colleagues, I want to turn the presentation over to Superintendent Johnson for his comments and remarks.
Thank you. Was making sure I was unmuted. I'm sorry I was not paying full attention to all your comments, Mr. Duncan, because I just read the new business that was just uploaded 5 minutes ago. And it's honestly in this time of a pandemic, of a crisis, when the department is really trying to work hard to work with the State Board of Education and really be bipartisan and put aside all our differences. It is just another sad chapter in this ongoing, unfortunately petty back and forth between the State Board of Education and the hardworking staff of the Department of Public Instruction. Whatever this letter is, being uploaded just 5 minutes ago, not talking to anyone at the department about it, not discussing with the senior leadership what actually was going on in the audit report from the state auditor and how we are already taking measures to address those issues and why those issues actually happened. But then just to put this letter up 5 minutes ago, very unfortunate. You all can discuss all y'all want about the CARES Act funding. I know the superintendents across the state would like us to submit the application as quickly as possible so we can get the money as quickly as possible. We have the benefit in North Carolina that other states don't have of our General Assembly actually being in session right now, and they are going to direct their federal funds, and we will have an understanding of how much of that goes to our needs that we've requested, and we will then be able to work with local superintendents to create plans that help address any of the needs that are not fulfilled by what the General Assembly will be putting out. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. And without addressing the statement with respect to the state audit at this time, I would note that the report only issued last night. At this point, it's my belief that it would be appropriate for us to consider moving this to a discussion item and moving it for action no earlier than our meeting next week, while we can get, at a minimum, get a better sense of what decisions are made by the legislature, which, as the superintendent indicated, is presently in session. And so I think that will inform and enlighten and provide a better report. In terms of trying to move forward right now, there's still some items that are actually being cleaned up in terms of getting in full Title I requests from some limited number of LEAs and/or charter schools, which is in the process of being cleaned up this week. And that cleaning up process could change the numbers very slightly. It would also be best to have that process finalized as well, I suspect, based on the comments that were made during the BizOp committee earlier in the week, that it would be helpful to have those matters cleared up so we had a clean slate of what we were dealing with and did not later have to adjust, however slightly, numbers again. So my recommendation would be that we accept this information, take the opportunity. It's a pretty good volume of information we got last night. Take the opportunity to study it further and have further discussion about this item and consider taking action on it at our meeting, our regularly scheduled meeting next week, with the greater information that we'll then be able to have.
Yeah, Mr. Duncan, without objection, we'll move this to a discussion item and for consideration at our next meeting. Do you want to have any discussion on it now?
Welcome any that any of our colleagues have.
Mr. Duncan, JB,
Yes, sir. Buxton.
two quick questions. One, my assumption would be, I think it's smart that department has telegraphed that we would plan to use the 10% set aside to support areas of statewide impact where we can most efficiently deliver those services. I assume it could be that we would judge that sending some of that money back to the districts if we did not think resources would be best accomplished efficiently could also be the case. So it may be that we would use less than the 10% depending on what items we were looking at. So that's one question. And then the second one is, if someone can just clarify this line that says LEAs will develop a plan for holding consultation sessions with private school officials to ensure equitable service and assistance are provided to eligible students. I assume that's about exceptional students with disabilities being served in private settings. I just wanted to confirm that.
Answer number one is yes. Answer number two is yes. That is actually coming from the U.S. Department of Ed. They want our public schools to make sure we're working with private schools to help eligible students who could benefit from this money as well.
And again, that eligible students are defined as students with disabilities being served in those settings due to IEPs?
I don't have in front of me exactly how it's defined, but we can get you all the exact definition. But yes, it is not going to be something that subsidizes private schools. It is specifically for students in need.
Right. Thank you.
And if I could ask the superintendent to confirm clarification on the first, yes, I believe you can make that decision to return some of those funds to the LEAs if that's the collective wisdom that is reached. But if I'm not mistaken, that decision has to be made within 60 days of receipt of the funds. And generally speaking, the funds have to be spent within a year of the funds being received. Can you confirm that, Superintendent?
I'm sorry, could you ask the question again? I'm handling requests for the DPI audit.
The question was, in response to the first question, about the money can be, that there, some of the 10% holdback could be returned to districts depending upon the decisions made about how to best use any money that is held back. That there's a 60-day time frame from receipt of the funds for the decision for that, timing of the decision for that to take place.
I'll have to get you, we'll get you those answers.
Okay, I believe that's the case, and I think in general, the Act makes pretty clear that all funds need to be spent within a year of receipt as well as another item. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, not hearing any. Our BizOp 2 item is North Carolina Governor's School. This is an action item. It has been on before. And heartbreakingly for those students who have had before them the opportunity of going to Governor's School this year, the decision after a lot of time, effort, energy, and thought, and trying to take into account all the developments with respect to the pandemic, the decision has ultimately been made in consultation with our partners, schools that we think so much of for their work on behalf of this great program, that we're not going to be able to go forward with it this year. That is the recommendation from the staff. The further recommendation is that there are a total of 70 students of the 360 students who have been selected for Governor's School. And this is about the usual ratio. About 70 of those students are rising juniors rather than rising seniors. Rising seniors make up the majority of the students who go to Governor's School. With respect to those 70 juniors, the recommendation is we make allowance that they be able to go to Governor's School next summer, since they were not having the opportunity to do it this year, and that we would otherwise still go forward with the selection of the students who, for the next year, that would be qualified to go by our normal processes of selection. Obviously, with the hope and very strong desire that we're back in place and ready to go with Governor's School again next summer. I think Sherry Thomas may be on the line. I don't know if you need to add anything to that I've not appropriately covered, so let me ask Ms. Thomas if she additional comment.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and good morning, Board Superintendent. We appreciate the thought that has gone into this discussion. It is heartbreaking for us to have to think about not holding Governor's School this year. But you are correct. We would like to include in that action that those current sophomores would be automatic attendees to Governor's School next year. They would not need to reapply. They would not need to re-audition. It would be an automatic for them if they chose to accept that and attend next summer. We regret we are having to do this, but for the health and safety of all students and staff, it just does not feel like we have any other option.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments on this item? Rather sad item in light of the pandemic, in which we've had so many sad items, but this is another to add to that list. All right, not hearing any, that will be a matter to vote on. We now move to BizOp 3, which is a discussion on K through 3 literacy diagnostics. The intention here is to have an update regarding the K through 3 literacy diagnostic, because there have been a number of new developments concerning this item over the course of the last several days. First, I'll ask our General Counsel to provide an update to the board regarding the status of the protest dispute over the procurement and other the Read to Achieve diagnostic tool. Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Happy to provide the board with a brief update on these matters. And just from the start, just want you to know I'll be limiting those comments to matters that are matters of public record and items in the public sphere. Board members, you'll recall that the State Board is not a party to the procurement dispute that's been before DIT since last summer. As you'll recall, that matter concerns the department's June 2019 contract award to iStation. And you'll remember that through that process, DIT issued a stay order that effectively paused the 2019 contract. And in light of that stay, a series of other contracts with iStation were executed. Those include the so-called no-cost agreement that ran from August through the end of December last year, an emergency contract in early January that DIT provided some guidance upon, a later emergency contract approved by DIT on January 24th that ran through the end of March. And then just earlier this month, after COVID hit, the State Board negotiated and Superintendent Johnson executed a more limited contract with iStation through the end of June that takes into account the unique circumstances that we all find ourselves in. And as you'll no doubt recall, that contract followed a robust, thoughtful discussion by board members in the department about appropriate steps to take in light of the pandemic. Last Friday afternoon, the department issued a press release entitled "Governor Cooper Announces Students and Educators Will Not Return to School Buildings for the Remainder of this School Year." And in the last paragraph of the press release, the department stated that it had terminated the June 2019 Read to Achieve diagnostic tool contract and will immediately begin a new process to procure one uniform reading diagnostic tool before the start of the 2020-21 school year. Later that afternoon, the board office was provided with a copy of the notice of termination letter sent to iStation, which confirms that the department seeks to terminate the June 2019 contract for convenience, and acknowledge that the termination will be effective 30 days from the date of the letter on May 24th. It also makes clear that the most recent contract with iStation, the one executed earlier this month, remains in effect. For additional updates, board members, on Tuesday this week, the department filed a motion to dismiss the protest litigation and asserted in its motion that with the contract and the project giving rise to Amplify's protest both terminated, no active controversy exists, and asked the hearing officer to dismiss the protest petition as moot. And then yesterday, the protesting vendor filed a response. As one would expect, the response disputes the department's position and makes reference to the timing of the termination as well as asserting some other legal arguments. Yesterday afternoon, the hearing officer issued an order giving the parties till tomorrow the opportunity to submit any additional response briefs. So as you can imagine, we'll continue to watch this case. I will add of note, in the department's filing on Tuesday, it stated that in light of the governor's order, pending legislation waiving statutory assessment requirements, and with the understanding that current classroom-based instructional practices are insufficient for a post-pandemic education system, NCDPI, after consultation with NCDIT's procurement office, terminated the June 7, 2019 iStation contract and began a new procurement. And so with that, board members, you're up to speed on those public developments concerning K-3 literacy.
This raises a few questions that I would like to see if we can get some information on. I think it would be important for the board, which notes that assessment tool is something that is important as we go through our school year for all our students, for our reading success, but in particular we're looking at a year where assessments as we come into the next year are going to be uniquely situated in a way that we have not, as a state system, ever seen in the lifetimes of any of the folks who are on this call. So the first question is the board was not aware that there was going to be a purported cancellation of the contract. So the question then for information for the board is, why did the department purport to cancel the contract before the DIT ruling occurred?
Mr. Duncan, this decision was made with DPI Legal and DPI Procurement, and we also worked with DIT on this. Schools are closed this year. We are not progress monitoring. As Mr. Snyder just said, the state board recognized the difference for this year, so they renegotiated the iStation contract, and we are facing a very different school setting next year, but we are still required by law to have a reading diagnostic. So with in mind the fact that we need to, as quickly as possible, go through a procurement process, we thought the best thing to do, after all consulting as a department, the wisest path forward is to terminate this contract and rebid. And we are working very closely with DIT on every step of the way, and will obviously take into mind criteria that addresses what schools will look like next school year and how we can have a system by which we are conducting the progress monitoring required by law.
If DIT had ruled to uphold the iStation contract, and I suppose still could happen if DIT proceeds to a ruling, we would not, isn't it true that we would not need a procurement process, for example, or are you suggesting that even if the iStation contract was upheld, you would be moving to a procurement process?
I don't think we need to go through hypotheticals, because we know the situation has changed dramatically due to this crisis. That's reflected by the state board's own work to renegotiate the iStation contract to finish out this year. We need to take into consideration that school is not going to look the same this August that it did last August. And yes, we need to rebid this with that in mind.
What is the status of this new procurement process in terms of timeline, budget, and proposed process approach?
That work has already started, and our procurement team has already started the project with North Carolina DIT.
Who is our procurement team?
Mr. Duncan, you know the answer to that. That's DPI operations, the superintendent of operations, deputy superintendent of operations, Catherine Johnston, and the team that reports to her.
And do we have is there a proposed budget for this procurement process?
I'm sure that is in the works, but it would be very similar to what was previously done a year ago.
So, well, that sort of leads to the question, how do we propose that the department will be going about conducting the new procurement? Is it going to be an RFP process, which I think is the one contemplated by the original session law, or is there something else being done?
We are going to take whatever directive we get from NCDIT. We all know that there were unfortunate issues in the last procurement, some bad actors, lies were told. Once those people were put under oath and the threat of perjury, those lies, those stories been changed. It's unfortunate all this has happened, but we want to make sure that this is extremely transparent, and we are working very closely with NCDIT to make sure that this is done completely on the up and up so that we do not have this controversy again.
Well, given all this, in reference to the controversy, given all the circumstances that we've gone through in the past year with respect to this procurement dispute, which again, the board has not been involved in and certainly has taken no position with respect to the dispute that's been done by the department. But as you noted, it's been a subject of significant public controversy. How will the department be able to ensure fairness and the perception of fairness and independence with any new procurement when there have, I don't know who all the bidders would be, but there's certainly been, the department has made, and you have made some press conference statements, some fairly derogatory comments about at least one of the potential bidders. How are we going to be able to be in a position to say that there is, to assure the perception of independence in any selection process if it's operated in the way that you have suggested thus far in terms of the team that would proceed? Are we going to get any field input? What are the assurances of independence, which strikes me, and I suspect might strike some board members as critical at this point, given the amount of controversy that has regrettably surrounded this situation.
That is why we are working with DIT so closely, and we are checking with them on every step of the process, and we'll seek their guidance on every step of this procurement process.
Will DIT be making the selection, or will the department be making, and by selection I mean the proposal of what will be brought to the board for consideration, because this surely will fall under contract 002 provision. This will
fall under the specific statutory language that it fell under the first time.
Right, and we'll come to the board thereafter for approval. And so, is it the department's recommendation that will be coming to the board, or will it be DIT's sole recommendation coming to the board? And if so, what would be the educational consultation DIT would be getting, given that obviously educational expertise is critical to making the best selection for our young students on this assessment tool?
Mr. Duncan, if you're not familiar with the law says that the state superintendent will form an evaluation committee. That evaluation committee will make a recommendation, and the state superintendent will approve that recommendation. We are doing all that in consultation with NCDIT because this is a technology platform.
And well, I think I've probably asked enough for now. I think In listening to those answers, it would be important for me to express to you. I think it's very important that this be not just a transparent process, which it is important that it be. And I feel like having timeline, budget, and a greater description of the process would assist in that transparency from the start. But also, it's critically important that it be perceived as a fully independent process, given all the issues that have arisen, and one that is very focused on taking advantage of the great expertise that exists in the field, as well as in the department, for how to best assess and come up with a judgment of what products, whatever it might be, the best assessment tool. And I
Mr.
have
Duncan,
concerns
the good news,
with what's been described so far.
the good news is the bad actors who were at the Department of Public Instruction are no longer at the Department of Public Instruction. The difficulty with the selection process is the law does require that the selection committee be made of people from the Department of Public Instruction. So the good news is, just like last time, we will have non-voting members from the field who can give feedback, but the voting members have to be people from the Department of Public Instruction according to the law.
And what is the timing of when the selection is to be made under your proposals?
We have started.
Procurement?
We've started this. We are working with DIT, and obviously we will be working to get these items accomplished as soon as possible.
It's obviously important. I'm really trying to pin down. We will have the need for whatever may be an appropriate training under, as you have pointed out, difficult circumstances. So I think some further definition of timing and how we can make a proper procurement selection process and still have enough time to implement it is, I'm not going to ask you to outline all that right now, but I think the board will want that very quickly. And I also would say under budget, when a process like this is undertaken, part of the contract policies anticipate that some sense of what the budgeting will look like, and it appears you've already started a process and the board has not heard anything, and the BizOp committee has not heard anything about the budgeting processes. So I will look forward to receiving that information as promptly as possible so the board can be informed. Those are the questions I have. There may be others from other board members, or may not be, but let me ask my colleagues if there are any questions or comments or thoughts that you would like to make at this time.
I do have a question. This is Ms. Camnett.
Please.
Superintendent Johnson, do you have a panel in place at this point in time, or are you still working on that?
We're still working on that. Again, we are at the very beginning phase of starting the project with NCDIT. This will happen quickly, but it will happen every step of the way, just like last time with guidance from NCDIT.
And is that something that when you do have a panel that can be shared with the board?
Absolutely. If that is, I believe that is public information that can be shared with the board.
I would appreciate that, along with just sort of keeping us apprised as much as you possibly can about the process.
Vice Chair Duncan, I have a question also.
Yes, Dr. Oxendine, please.
Thank you very much. I'm now kind of wearing the hat of a classroom teacher for, if you would allow me to do that for just a couple of minutes. I wonder, want to be sure that this decision to terminate iStation is not going to interfere with what is going on in homes today with iStation. I'm thinking back to the board's action a couple, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago to extend the emergency contract. I've kind of lost the train of thought here. I can
help you, Dr. Oxenden.
Okay, thank you.
The very simple answer to your question is this is a separate contract from the one you were thinking of. So this is the original award that was in dispute. That dispute has been going on for over 9 months. And obviously things have changed drastically, so we are going to just do, quite honestly, what we offered to settle way back in the fall, and that is rebid. That is something that is the right thing to do right now, given the circumstances of how much school has changed under these very trying times.
Thank you very much. That's all I needed to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you. Are there other colleagues?
Mr. Duncan, also, just as the State Board Office was represented in the last procurement by your attorneys, we are happy to have your attorneys on the panel again for this procurement.
Thank you. Other questions and comments?
This is Mariah Morris. I have a comment.
Please.
I would just like to very respectfully ask that during the procurement process, that an advisory team of teachers, K-3 teachers, are involved in the process. And if you need any assistance at any level gathering such a team, I would be more than happy to help with that process, because teachers are so passionate and excited to help our students with the K-3 literacy piece, and this has been such a big topic for us over the last year.
Thank you for that comment, and also thank you for the work you and your colleagues have, as you say, passionately been doing on behalf of our students. Other questions or comments?
Duncan, JB.
Yes, Ms. Buxton.
I just want to remind my fellow board members that when many of us first joined the board, I think a number of us joined when the school business modernization RFP process was ongoing, and that process impaneled LEA and other members who created, in my judgment, buy-in and credibility from the field about the different tools that would be used with school business modernization. I think there was a sense that it was the field-facing knowledge and expertise that was influencing those selections. And I think given the events of, it's 9 months, but it seems longer, with our reading diagnostic, which is absolutely one of the top priorities of this board and has been suggested to us by local teachers and principals and superintendents as a critical tool coming back to school this fall. I think it is an utmost priority for us that we get, to Ms. Morris's good point, strong participation from influential and credible district voices that are seen as evaluating and recommending. And I think this will be important for us to move on from this chapter. Will be important for the vendor that is chosen to be able to do so with the comfort that they have strong buy-in and backing from all parties. And I think from the department and board working together. So I hope that that school business modernization RFP process is one that we could model and would kind of put in our requirements for approval that we have something that looks like that has strong field representation. I'm just concerned about where we're going to be if we don't have something like that in place in the eyes of our teachers and principals out there using the tool.
And to that point, as a reminder, again, there were outside voices on the panel for the Read to Achieve diagnostic tool. The law requires voting members are from BPI. But yes, there were outside voices on the panel that reviewed the tools.
Any other questions? Well, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Buxton.
Just to follow up, that I think as independent a process as we can get before that recommendation comes back to us, I think will serve us all.
I am sure NCDIT will, again, make sure that is a priority.
if this is Ms. Camnitz, if I could just add to what JB has said, it seems to me that we've got a great opportunity here to take Ms. Morris up on her offer. And what we've got out there right now are teachers who have used two quite different systems. And out of that experience, I think will come some very wise counsel.
Thank you for those observations. Do we have additional questions and comments? All right, not hearing any, I think we can summarize by saying, Mr. Superintendent, that we are vitally interested in the process here and vitally interested in it being entirely transparent. And I think I hear some concern, at least, that strong consideration be given to input from the field, given that although DIT can be our excellent partners in the technology aspect of this, DIT does not bring the educational expertise our from the field do to combine with the educational expertise of the folks in our department. So I think we can find a way to get as much independence.
That is what we did last time, and that is what we would do again this time.
All right. Not hearing any other comments, I think we have completed the BizOp meetings at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. That concludes our committee work. Colleagues, we do have one item of new business to come before us today, and this is consistent with the reports we've been receiving in closed session for a number of months now concerning the state auditor's work. Regrettably, the state auditor's report was made public just last evening, so within the last 24 hours, and the statement that before you was just recently drafted by BizOp committee. The intent of this statement, before I read it, is one, to be responsive to the state auditor's report, provide an initial response, but in particular to convey our strong support to the department as they work through responding to these matters and taking appropriate actions to address the issues that the state auditor has determined. So this statement is before us today for consideration of making an initial response, and I'll read it for your review at this point. The State Board of Education is aware of the audit report on the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction that was released yesterday by the North Carolina State Auditor's Office. We respect and appreciate the work of the state auditor and take very seriously the findings that were identified in the audit report. The board is disappointed by the number of findings and the concerns raised by those findings. The board notes that the department has provided responses to the findings, which state actions or planned actions that are to be taken with the intent to correct the issues that were identified in the audit report. The board is focused on supporting the department, correcting the findings, and moving forward with implementing enhanced internal procedures and controls to meaningfully reduce any future findings. In that regard, it is the board's intent to monitor the department's efforts in resolving the findings and to support those efforts by receiving progress reports. It's important to observe that the department has many outstanding employees who provide great service to the citizens of North Carolina in supporting the education of our children. We're thankful for the work of so many of these department employees, and we commend them for their contributions to our state. That said, the board has been concerned for some time about the number of vacancies within the department in several key areas of department operation. This has put a genuine strain on the department. The board has supported and will continue to support filling of key vacancies that will undoubtedly assist in addressing matters raised in the audit report. The board believes that supporting the department's employees and full staffing of department positions will be a critical aspect of resolving audit report issues and deterring any recurrence of such findings. It's a priority of this board that there be a high level of public confidence in the handling of the financial affairs of the department. We end by again thanking the state auditor for bringing these findings to light. The board would further emphasize its determination to move forward with seeking assurance that the department will resolve these issues and to provide support and collaboration in bringing about that outcome. So that's the proposed statement that's before us today. I'll open that for comment by my colleagues. Any comments on this statement? Well, hearing none, then this item will be before us for action at the end of our agenda today. Moving forward, last Friday, the governor, in conjunction with the State Board of Education, State Superintendent, the Department of Health and Human Services, made the difficult decision to continue distance and remote learning for the remainder of this school year. While we yearn for our students' return to school, the health and safety of our students, educators, and staff is and will remain the guiding priority as we make COVID-19 related decisions. We look forward to the continued collaboration with the department, with educators across the state, and with other partners as we work to respond to the many needs of our students and districts during this time. We appreciate the collaboration and teamwork with members of the General Assembly, particularly the education chairs, and with the governor's office. We admire your resiliency and devotion to the necessary work we have before us to maintain remote and distance learning until the end of this school year and to formulate a reentry plan to welcome our students for the 2020-21 school year. So at this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from action or action on first reading agendas. The three matters before us are ES&P 1, BizOp 2, and the audit statement. Hearing no request, is there a motion to approve those three items as presented?
Chairman, I make a motion to approve the three items as presented. Wendell Hall.
Motion by Mr. Hall. Is there a second?
Second, Ms. Kamnitz.
Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Any discussion on the motion? Just to remind board members, the motion is to approve ES&P 1, BizOp 2, and the audit statement. Hearing no questions, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain, Mr. Chastain, Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you, board members, advisors, and staff for your attention and participation today. Seeing no additional business for the board at this time, other than to remind my colleagues that we will have our regular May meeting next week. I now request a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Ford.
Motion by Mr. Ford. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan, Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Motion carries. We are adjourned. Have a good day.
Thank you. Everybody be safe.
Thank you, everyone.